Hi, everyone. This is Talk Back. It's May 10th, and today we have two very interesting guests. We're going to talk about an issue that is misunderstood by many, that is understood by too many who are frightened that we're not doing enough about it, and that our world is in danger. And I'm not talking just about Donald Trump. Sorry. Can't help doing that with what's going on in our country today. But I want to introduce two very important leaders in Connecticut on the issue of climate change in our environment, and they are Ann Schmidt. Ann is someone from the League of Women Voters who we visited with last month, I believe, but she is also has credentials in biology, a master's degree, 30 years of professional experience in pharmacology and drug discovery at Pfizer Global Research. And after her retirement from Pfizer, she has been working as a volunteer in so many issues. Welcome, Ann. Nice to have you. And also with Ann is her husband, Dr. Roger Coons. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Coons. Roger is a president of Sustain Audit LLC, a sustainable practices company, and he is a Connecticut state coordinator for Citizens Climate Lobby, which we'll be talking about. He works with Ann and with other people all across Connecticut on legislation and education in the issues about the environment. He's been an elected official. He's helped write legislation, and he's even involved with a Broadway show. I don't know how that came into your into your resume, but it's there. I'll ask you about it. So welcome, Roger. Nice to see you. All right, and before we get to the big questions like what is climate change and why is it important, what's going on, tell me something about yourself and your interest in this subject, why it's so important for you to be involved.
Climate change is really important to me because we have grandchildren. They are 2 and 5, and if we don't try and fix the issues around climate change, the world that they'll be living in is just going to be unbearable. And so we're trying to make the world and planet as livable as possible for them. It's our motivator. Okay. Well, my motivator.
And so that, how many years do you say in your life it was an important subject for you to be involved with?
Well, probably since I met Roger. I've always been interested in the environment, but climate change specifically, I would say, since I met Roger. And then getting involved actively in 2016 with becoming an advocate at the federal level. I think we'll talk about that in a minute, but yeah.
Okay, and we also need to point out that when we had our show on the League of Women Voters and the work that you did, you talked about the fact that in addition to working on elections and voting rights, it was very important for you to have advocacy on other issues, and climate change is one of the issues that you work on through the League.
Yes, absolutely.
So some of your work is through the League, some of it is through the Citizens Climate Lobby that we're going to talk about.
Yes.
Right? Okay. So Roger, tell us, how did you develop, I guess from an early age, your interest in science and the environment in this issue?
Well, Sheila, I have always been in love with the planet. As a fossil collector, when I could crawl all the way up to working in all aspects of geology. I used to work for the world's largest mining company, and I worked in 80 countries around the world, and I got to see the perspective of how various cultures, numerous cultures around the world, were dealing with what we initially didn't fully understand as a changing climate. Droughts, people having to move, so suddenly we have climate refugees. And I was in the middle of this. I lived and worked in Africa for 10 years, and all over the world saw the same thing. I saw in the people around the world in all these different cultures a common theme of we want to be safe, we want a great place for our children, we want a home, we need food, and we want good jobs. This is universal. And it's really at the heart of climate change, because climate change, as I learned in the 70s and 80s as it grew in importance and understanding, was hitting every single aspect of our society and civilization. No part of our society or civilization is untouched by the impacts of these intense storms, of droughts, of floods, of sea level rise, of heat waves and things like this. Just this past week, we've had over 200 tornadoes roaring through the Midwest part of this continent. This is unusual, and this is triggered by more energy in the atmosphere from warming the planet. And so early on as a geologist, geologists know about climate change because as you study the Earth, it's throughout the Earth's history. It's not rare. What's rare, what's unique about what's happening now is this climate change event is the first one in the history of the Earth that is intensified by the sentient species on the planet, humans. That's never happened before. We have intensified it. When I was an undergrad in college, we thought we were in an interglacial period, and we thought there would be another ice age at some point. Well, the Earth has warmed so much that that's not going to happen now. We know that we have moved into a new period in geologic history and in human history where this is killing people.
So, couple of things from what you were saying. You're saying that global warming is a natural environmental thing that happens, that is happening over the years, but that human beings are making it worse and are adding to it and creating more difficulty. Without human hands, it would still go forward, but take longer to do its change, to its.
So think of it in terms of time. Humans, we're short-term thinkers mostly. Like, what's for dinner tonight? What am I going to do this weekend? Maybe I'm going to invest some money for the next 5 or 10 or 15 years. In geologic time, it's years, decades, millennia. And so the Ice Age ended 10,000 years ago due to a natural cause. And that started a slow warming thing that should have gone on for another 20, 30,000 years before maybe another Ice Age. But when the Industrial Revolution started and we started taking what was sequestered carbon, that is coal and oil and gas, and then taking that carbon and putting it back into the atmosphere, the Earth's carbon balance was entirely disrupted. And just in this last legislative session, one of the House of Representatives person says, CO2, it's only 420 parts per million. That's nothing. He called it a trace gas. Well, the analogy is if a bacterium is really small, but it can kill you. Well, it's not necessarily how a non-scientist might interpret a concentration of a gas. It's how that small concentration of gas can absorb energy and change the climate of the planet. And that's what's happening. Okay. We have this huge impact from the sun and carbon dioxide.
Okay. So I see out there people like you who are so committed. You want to save the planet from the disasters that will come if we don't do something about the carbon problem and climate change. And then I see other people who are saying, hey, this is just the way the Earth works. This is how it happens. I watched a stupid senator from Oklahoma take a snowball in the Senate of the United States of America and throw it and say, how do you like this for climate change? It's cold outside. And what an idiot. But people believe, and these are educated people that are doing this kind of thing. So why do you think there is such a resistance? Is it economic? I mean, that's what we thought, the resistance to tobacco, to cigarettes, because they could not give up the economic benefit from killing people with tobacco. Is it that, or is it just ignorance? Or is there truly another cadre of scientists who say, this is not true, this is just a normal workings of our planet, and forget about it, just go on and enjoy life, do whatever you want?
So I would say that's a great question. And in addition to just some non-scientists believing, in climate change, and we shouldn't use that word believe, but I think there's a lot of mis and disinformation out there. There's websites that are carbondioxide.com that go through why carbon dioxide is good. And you can, if you're not a scientist and you don't understand the bigger picture of what they're talking about, you're going to believe that. And I think that is a source of, a big source of the problem. There's also websites on how natural gas. So natural gas is actually methane. And methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. So it's 25 to 80 times, depending on how long it's been in the atmosphere, worse than carbon dioxide. So natural gas, or methane, actually is much worse. So, but there are websites again saying clean energy, cleaner energy, clean energy, and a lot of misinformation again listed about natural gas and its effects on the atmosphere and global warming.
So I don't know if it's this way in other countries around the world, but in America it's almost part of being a Democrat or Republican. Granted, there are Republicans who believe in climate change and,
yes,
and understand the science. But in general, it's like my Republican friends just dismiss it because their leader says it's not. I mean, does that exist anywhere else in the world?
Oh, yes.
That kind of blanket resistance because of politics and not because of the science?
Good example is Australia.
Really?
They passed a carbon tax to tax carbon from fossil fuels. And that was passed by a progressive administration. The next administration that came in was conservative. They got rid of it. So Brazil, has a hyper conservative leader that really denigrated anybody who wanted to work on climate change.
Not Bolsonaro, the current guy. You talking about the current guy?
Yeah, the Bolsonaro, and even in Europe, we're seeing the EU step back a little bit from climate action because of the Ukraine-Russian war, which is putting a real crimp on their energy supplies. Now the U.S. is sending natural gas to Europe more than Europe is sending to the rest of the EU countries. But it's a problem. But you mentioned economics. This is a huge part of it. And it's a huge part of it because our oil companies are massive global companies with huge amounts of capital. They employ tens of thousands of people. A lot of these people in these jobs are really good people, many of whom agree with climate scientists, but they're scientists doing their jobs. But the leadership is where a lot of the policies and the money distribution decisions are made. So we have that incredible engine of fossil fuel companies that dictated policy, that got benefits and subsidies for the oil, gas, and coal industries over 80 years. There's tens of thousands of these subsidies. And the denial for much of our understanding of climate change from these big companies was to preserve their industry so they could make their profits and so on and so forth.
Aren't they also working, though, on alternative aren't they trying to make
Some are.
transition
Some of them,
to cleaner
So a good
energy?
example is British Petroleum, well known for the big spill in the Gulf. And they changed their logo to a green logo, which was a marketing thing to make it look more attractive. But they had funding for renewable energy, hydrogen, which we're not in favor of hydrogen, and also what are called biofuels. As Anne was talking about natural gas and methane, biofuels are just methane. So it's not any better than natural gas because it leaks and it adds to the global warming problem. But the percentage of money from the profits and the budgeting within a big company fossil fuel company towards these renewable energies is often less than 1%.
Yeah.
So and having worked in that industry as an economic geologist, if you want to really commit to something, you're going to put more than 1% into it.
Right.
And so what we see is a little bit of honest effort, a little bit of greenwashing, and a little bit of caution, and also a little bit of, well, we really do still need to make
Right.
our fossil fuel.
And then we're
Well,
gonna
just
get
one
to-
quick additional point on that is that they have a super strong lobby
Right.
in both federally and in Connecticut.
Of course.
So our bill that we had last year actually didn't make it to the floor because of fossil fuel companies getting to the leaders of the House, I think it was,
Right.
and it's
And the
and,
Senate.
and the
Right.
Senate.
Right. And then using the tax code to incentivize people to do something or not to do something. A lot of
Yes.
people think that may not always work. I mean, look how
Yeah.
many years it took the automobile industry to put in seatbelts because they had to spend
Yep.
more money and so on. So that's all kind of debatable too. What's the best way to incentivize and do all this? But let's get back to
Okay.
basic principles
Sure.
and let's talk about exactly what is climate change. How do you give us the layman's version of what it is?
So that is the warming of our atmosphere due to greenhouse gas effect. So there's a lot more greenhouse gases that are trapped in our atmosphere, and they don't let the heat escape, and so it warms our Earth. Would you agree to that?
And then what are the consequences?
And the
of that?
consequences. So again, as Roger alluded to earlier, it's really over quite a bit of time. You can't think about a certain event that happens. It's a change over time. So often you'll hear about I think it's called the hockey stick graph, that tracks the temperature, global temperature, and it's very, very consistent, and then all of a sudden it goes like this, and then it takes off. And the timing with that coincides with the Industrial Revolution. So it starts slowly then at that point. I think around 2000, it really took off.
Yes, the 70s was the
The 70s.
I call them
But
the heart
underneath
attack
it all,
years.
the Earth is warming in general.
Yes.
It is, so it had been, if you look at that graph in particular, it fluctuates, absolutely.
Okay.
But that fluctuation got bigger, and then it actually took, we're in a period right now where it's higher and higher than it's ever been. So last year was the hottest year on record. And do you remember?
We passed 1.5 degrees centigrade for the
Centigrade.
first time.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what does
Yeah.
that mean?
That means that there's so much energy from the additional carbon dioxide and methane in the atmosphere, which is absorbing the sun's energy and trapping it, like Ann said, that the Earth warms up beyond what is natural. So
Yeah.
if the Earth warms in the geologic past, we're looking at tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years for that to happen. We did it in 100 years. And so the ecosystems they didn't evolve to change that fast. So we see
humans are destroying the environment.
Yes.
Way beyond what nature would have
way
done.
beyond what nature
Yeah.
did.
Okay, and so what are
Yes.
the effects on every aspect of our environment? Our water, our air, our
Yep.
oceans.
So we
our-
have we're in the middle now of a mass extinction event triggered by human activity by putting carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. Methane is natural gas, just to remember that. So we are seeing a loss of species on a daily basis that's greater than a normal time in an ecosystem.
So like what species?
There's birds,
Birds,
there's
insects.
lots of insects, lots of organisms that we find in soil that are important to our food system. We're finding mammals. I mean, the poster child of climate change is the polar bear.
Right.
Okay, is the polar bear going to go extinct? We don't actually
And
know.
what's the connection between climate change and the extinction of these species? How does that work? What are
So
they losing
as
out?
the planet warms, and as an ecosystem is hit with 8 years of drought, for instance, or long terms of flooding. Like Texas is a good example. They had 8 years of drought. Now they're getting washed out of town. So now they're in a flood phase, okay? And so what this does is this destroys ecosystems. It destroys the food network that the animals and the plants in that ecosystem require to survive. And another aspect of warming the planet is invasive species that often were inputted into an ecosystem accidentally through agriculture, or somebody saying, I'm going to bring a plant from Indonesia over here to help control soil erosion. Well, that gets out of control because it doesn't have any natural competitors. And as it warms up, this thing spreads and migrates farther north, as we're seeing in our forests in Connecticut right now.
Somebody said, yeah, does this have anything to do with anything? Somebody said that there's an infestation of cicadas.
That's natural.
That's just a natural
That's
thing.
natural.
That every few years they just.
Every 17,
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with climate change.
No.
Oh, okay.
So
No.
if climate change is impacting the circadian periodicity, we do not yet know,
Yeah.
because as Ann said, you can't look at one event or a year. You have to look at a decade or 20 or 30 or
Century.
40 or 50 years or a century. And then the scientists say, oh, we see this trend and we're losing species. The planet's getting warmer. Our ecosystem diversity, how many species are in an ecosystem? Say there's 5,000 species in an ecosystem, and that was 100 years ago. We look at that ecosystem now, and maybe there's 1,000. That's an extinction event.
Okay, so what else besides extinction of species?
Huge impact to people.
Okay.
Huge.
I hear that that Florida might wind up in the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh,
that
well,
would be bad.
yeah.
It's going underwater,
Okay.
and that's
Yes.
not.
How does that happen?
Okay, so as we warm the planet, the polar ice caps, north and south, the Arctic Ocean, and the Antarctic continent, which has so much ice on it, as well as Greenland and the alpine glaciers and the mountain ranges, these melt. And they aren't built up every year like they were hundreds of years ago and thousands of years ago. And so that water ends up in the ocean. That causes sea level rise. Sea level rise, since most of our population lives along coastal areas, these become climate refugees because their homes and their businesses and their infrastructures are flooded. This is happening right now, and it's been happening for a long time. And a river like Connecticut River in Connecticut is a tidal river. That is, it flows directly into the sea. So if the ocean level rises, the river level rises, because that's pushing salt water further in. And that means a town like Hartford, which still gets floods and has always had some floods, those floods will get
Worse.
more and more severe. And this destroys people's investments in homes. You can't just move your home. And so people are really already being heavily impacted financially. In the health world,
Health system.
the disease and insect-borne diseases are spreading because of a warmer planet. They're going to places that further north and around the globe that they weren't there before. And so people are more subject to getting an expansion of things like West Nile virus,
Okay,
which is
so
expansive.
if we do nothing and we just keep on the human activity and industry the way we always have, what's the time frame for bad things happening to our planet?
Right now.
Planet?
Right now.
It is happening.
It's happening right now.
It's happening right now.
It's important to talk about climate change impacts as not when they happen. They've been happening for decades. But it's a slow hill we're climbing.
Yeah.
And because we don't think long term in general as a species, we'll say, oh, it's raining a little bit more now. Well, the storm intensity is now measured by the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and by the U.S. Geological Survey, and by NASA. And this is measured stuff. What's really important about the people who deny climate or promote disinformation is the science is first looking at what's measured, not predicted, not in a model or a
good
theory. It's measured. The temperature warming of the planet is measured. The CO2 increase in the atmosphere is measured. The increase in methane in the atmosphere is measured. we take those things and then we say, oh, we have more intense storms now. We have more drought over here, more floods over here, more disease from insect-borne illnesses over here. Those then, we look at their increase and we say, well, they correlate very well with the increase in temperature, the increase in CO2, the increase in methane.
And not only with the actual increases of those things, but what those things impact in our environment.
Okay.
So in a warmer environment, you're going to have some things grow better, right, that then result in these.
So is human activity just hastening Florida falling into the ocean? In
Yeah.
other words, it will
Yes.
happen eventually, thousands of years from now?
It wasn't predicted to happen before climate change was really understood 45 years ago. But right now, in the next 300 years, we're going to lose 2/3 of Florida. 2/3. In our
But it would happen anyway, but many years later if we.
It depends.
had-
It
if we
depends
fixed
on.
Or maybe not
It
even
depends
at all.
on the natural
Yeah.
cycle of warming and
cooling.
things. So it had when the glaciation occurred, which ended about 10,000 years ago. At the maximum glaciation, there was so much ice formed on land that the sea level dropped 300 to 400 feet. So Florida was huge. It was the continental shelf. And all those caves and things that were made then are now, a lot of those are underwater. That's why they go diving in those caves, because the natural process at the end of the Ice Age 10,000 years ago raised that sea level back up to 300 feet. Now, with our increased accelerated melting of the rest of the ice on the planet, which is happening in hundreds of years, not thousands of years, we're going to see more rapid flooding of coastal areas. There's a fascinating thing that we went to one of the Al Gore climate leadership training things, and he showed a picture. He was in Miami, and he was 2 miles inland from the shore. He was in a parking garage, and the parking garage was flooded at high tide. No unusual storm, just high tide. He opened the door of his car, and there was an octopus hanging onto his tire.
Wow.
2
Isn't
miles
that
inland.
amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is not normal.
Right.
You know, this shouldn't, and this is because human activity of burning fossil fuels, which is sequestered carbon
Yeah.
that nature put
So
away.
then people complain about Al Gore taking private planes all around
Yes.
the world.
We all
Well,
fly.
yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
but
No,
that's what they
you're
do.
right.
That's what they do. So, so every country in the world has its own challenges depending upon where it sits in terms of
Yes.
the oceans, whatever.
Yeah.
And the world has come to some kind of a consensus. They do have the Planet Talks.
The International Panel on Climate Change, the
Climate Change
IPCC.
And the Paris
Right.
Agreement.
And the Paris Agreement, which I hate to call it president, which Trump
Yep.
got us out of, and now President Biden is getting us back into.
Right.
And we seem to be slowly recognizing the problem, but like so many issues, we don't do anything until it's an emergency. But this is, you're saying this is an ongoing emergency, but people don't recognize it, right?
I agree that people don't recognize it's an emergency and that we need to do something sooner rather than later. And it's funny that you bring up the word emergency, because there are climate emergency declarations all around in different countries, different states, different towns.
And all through
And
Connecticut.
in the bill, we had a
Right, the House of Representatives of Connecticut did
Yeah.
pass, the
Well-
bill didn't get passed in the Senate, you said.
Right.
Just recently, just the last few days. So what did the Connecticut recognize by the House at least passing this
Well,
bill?
so a climate crisis. So it initially was a climate emergency, but that word invoked concerns that the governor could do whatever he wanted to do, which is not true. However, in a negotiation with everybody, that word flipped to crisis. But it's at least it still has that,
Yeah.
urgency with it. So that did pass. That was one
In
of
the House.
in the
But
House.
even Connecticut, which is considered a more liberal progressive state, you still couldn't get the Senate of both houses to pass a bill
That's correct.
acknowledging that there is a climate crisis.
That's
And
correct.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's pretty
And
bad.
we helped.
it is.
We
It
worked
is
with
bad.
cities across Connecticut to pass city statements of a climate emergency. And so when we pitched this bill, and our original title was the Climate Emergency of Connecticut Bill, and that got changed to a more complicated name about climate action. But we had a dozen cities in Connecticut who, in their city councils, passed a
Climate
statement
emergency.
that there's a climate emergency.
Including Hartford and New Haven. So big towns, I think Bridgeport might have been in there. We were trying to get Waterbury to do that. But actually when Representative Palm was defending the bill in the House, she actually read off every single town that had declared an emergency, and it was a long list. So the Southeastern Council of Governments also declared an emergency, climate emergency, and so that was, what, 20, maybe 12 or 20 towns in this part of the
But it's a worldwide
state.
problem, and if
It
one
is.
country takes it seriously and the rest of the world doesn't, what gets done?
That's called leadership. So America is a country that the world looks to for leadership in all things. And we're stumbling on that. Connecticut, one of the arguments, Connecticut's a small state, it doesn't matter what we do, we're just a little tiny state. To that we say a wholehearted baloney. You lead by example. You can't lead by hypocrisy. And so by us not getting the Senate to pass the first foundational climate bill since the Global Warming Solutions Act was passed in 2009, this is really a dereliction of duty. It's a dysfunctional situation in our government. And a deal was made. We don't think that was a good deal, nor does the governor, nor does everybody else we've talked to that has been working on this.
So,
Go ahead.
One of the things that Connecticut has is a filibuster. I think we're only one of 5 or 6 states in the U.S. that at the state level has a filibuster. So every 2 years when the new General Assembly is inducted, they negotiate rules. And this is one where I think when you're have majority party, this gives so much power to the minority that it's handicapping us.
So they're just
So
making deals. They're
they're ma-
bartering, and
they're-
this got
instead of
stuck because-
actually passing
right.
legislation, they're making deals.
Because-
Yes.
Or they're stopping things.
Or they're stopping
So it
things.
showed a lack of priority, obviously,
And
on the part of the leadership of the state.
It's
a
worse
very
than that.
profound, let me just finish
Yeah,
that thought
sorry.
on that, because the state of Minnesota now has a Democratic Senate, House, and governor. And in the last 2 years or so, they have passed more climate friendly environmental bills than Connecticut has in the last since 2008. That's incredible. It just shows that, and they do not have a filibuster. So I don't think it's just the filibuster. If you look at some of the bills the bill that we took part in crafting with the legislature this year, it was a lot more incentives, and it was very business friendly, and it was written that way to get more support from the entire legislature. But
we're
even
not-
even
we're
that,
we're just not ready.
yeah,
Not ready
perhaps.
for it, which is outrageous to
Yeah.
people like you.
Yes,
who
yes.
feel that we're in an emergency situation. And
And I would add to Ann's point that when a bill which is supported by the majority of the people in Connecticut, the voters, is dealed out, that's a failure of leadership. And the failure of leadership is profound because what we know, the costs of climate change, if you spend $1 now, you're going to save thousands of dollars down the road. If you don't spend that $1 now, it's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars.
The forward-looking thinking is not what legislatures do. Look at what happens in Washington. They wait till the last minute to just pass a stopgap measure for the budget to go another month for another stopgap and threaten that they're going to shut down the right? So
An interesting point there is that FEMA does have a program now for those people that are in coastal areas that keep getting flooded or hit by hurricanes, that to either relocate their house to another property or sell it. And so, because it really doesn't make sense to keep building on the same place that's just going to get.
But somehow it just has not hit the consciousness of the American people, full blast, bullseye like it should. That's where we are now. So let's, we have some slides that we want to show, but let's just talk about what are the remedies. So we've got this problem, and the problem is affected by human behavior and human industry. What are the different remedies that we need?
Well, first, education. And again, we absolutely respect and applaud Representative Christine Palm. She got a requirement in Connecticut to have climate education, a requirement in schools. And
in the high schools?
High schools and middle schools. And that was a big deal because young people, as you may remember when maybe your kids or when you were little influencing your parents, they can influence their parents better than any of us can. And so that's a really critical thing, because that, if well done, tells the children and the young people and the college students the truth about how the science, how the economics, how the engineering, how the social aspects, climate justice, environmental justice issues actually work, how we get that information and how we can fix it.
Because we make fun of people who hug trees. I mean, I think of that as a, you know, it's not cool to hug.
We're not hugging trees. We're trying not to breathe methane and carbon dioxide. The second thing is energy.
Energy.
This is
a big one.
Deal, and this is a real problem in the Connecticut General Assembly. We have some real champions like Jonathan Steinberg. I mean, he's one of my climate heroes. Christine Palm is one of our climate heroes. These people understand the need to make the transformation from a carbon economy to a clean energy economy. A clean energy economy means we significantly reduce the use of coal, natural gas, and oil. Now, in Connecticut, we don't use much coal. I mean, it's used at a couple pizza places and things like this in homes. But oil and natural gas, big deal. So how do we do that? The solution is a ordered, rapid, over 10 to 15 year period, not next month, change to solar, wind, battery storage, geoexchange, geothermal using heat pumps. We know this works. In our own house, we have solar panels and a backup battery. Last week, as an example, we only used the grid energy 1.2% of the time. We powered the house at night from the battery. The sun charged, even on a cloudy day, it still charges that battery.
So we're making some progress in the country. The Inflation Reduction Act, which had a lot of climate change stuff, that was good.
Very good. That's
how
brilliant.
was that good? What did that do that is very helpful?
A lot of incentives are in there. So incentives for switching to electric heat pumps. So discounts or tax credits, for example. And Connecticut has those as well. I think a lot of people don't appreciate how much the Green Bank in Connecticut does for transitioning to clean energy, including not only residents, but schools and businesses. Other incentives that they have.
So, electrifying buildings.
Electrifying buildings, building efficiency, insulation, also electric cars. Electric chargers are also now have incentives.
Right,
Yeah, so a lot is being done.
And I want to also just point out that Citizens Climate Lobby is not alone in this. We've been working with Save the Sound, Charles Rothenberger, Lori Brown at League of Conservation Voters, the League of Women Voters with Erin and her huge team, and I'm a member of League of Women Voters, and the CT Roundtable for Jobs,
Right.
And the
Aziz,
Nature
the Nature
Conservancy.
Conservancy with Jonathan,
Nathan.
Nathan
So there are
Froehling.
many lobbying groups that.
Yeah, the coalition,
Yeah.
actually.
But also,
yeah.
the Connecticut Small Business Association supported our bill this time.
Wow, that's-
Because we had jobs and entrepreneurial
Yeah.
opportunities in it.
Right.
Because you've got to have livable wage jobs, and we want to keep young people in
Right.
Connecticut.
People don't seem to believe it when President Biden or others talk about how alternative forms of energy will create new industries and new
Yeah.
jobs. They
Yes.
don't believe it. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't want to make
There
the
are numbers
transition.
now.
I remember
that-
when Hillary Clinton went to West Virginia and talked to them about transitioning
Yes.
from coal. They kicked her out of the state. You know,
Yes.
it's not, they just can't. They can't accept
But
it.
It's hard
actually,
to change
there
a
are
mind.
some
Yeah.
coal mines now, even transitioning to clean energy projects.
So talk about,
and-
before we get to the slide, just talk about the
Sure.
concept of the carbon tax. What
Oh,
does that
yes.
mean? And have your groups decided that a tax on carbon is a good incentive? to help-
Absolutely.
okay,
Yes,
how does that work?
absolutely.
In fact, Citizens Climate Lobby had a think tank with expertise 10, 12 years ago. And Citizens Climate Lobby wrote the bill, the bones of the bill, that is now called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. It's a carbon tax with a cashback
How
This
does
is
it
at the
work?
federal
at
level.
the federal
Yeah.
level.
Okay.
And Nancy Pelosi told us about 5 years ago that if you can guarantee passage in the Senate, she says we can pass this easily in the House. The one holdout from West Virginia stopped it from getting into the
Manchin,
Senate.
yeah.
So we missed changing the future of America to a clean energy society by one vote
That
5
was
years ago.
Manchin, wow.
This bill has been introduced into the House every session and has been introduced again. We are entirely on board with a carbon fee and dividend or a carbon tax and cashback. The way it works.
Yeah.
So it goes to the source of the carbon that's being taken out of the ground, the fossil fuel companies. And it puts a tax on the encumbered or contained carbon in a barrel of oil, in a cubic foot of natural gas, or a ton of coal. That tax is paid when it comes out of the ground at the pump or the mine
By the fossil fuel companies.
by the fossil fuel companies. That goes into a Department of Treasury carbon dividend trust fund, which would be created in that bill. Now, the first year, it's $15 a ton of carbon dioxide that the
Per
fossil
ton, yep.
fuels have to pay. So a ton of coal, which is about this big by this big by this big, will produce almost 2 tons of CO2. So a ton of coal in the first year would pay $15 plus $15, $30. So
And
for
the
now,
cost of a ton of coal is $60 to $90.
$60 to $90. So
a
this has
ton.
a big impact on the
So that,
industry.
yeah, so well, you'll go into the rising fee, but yeah,
So
it'll
then
put
it
coal out
goes
of
up
business.
$10 every year until such time we meet our emissions reduction goals of 90% reduction in the country in our energy sector. So what happens to that money? Well, it goes into this Department of Treasury Carbon Dividend Trust Fund, and every month it is evenly divided to every U.S. citizen and legal resident in the country. If you got kids, you get a half more credit, up to 2 or 3 kids. And what that does is that you and your children are not to blame for creating this problem. And when we started using fossil fuels, there was not the intent to create climate change. It really, fossil fuels changed society initially for the good, but there are unintended consequences. And the unintended consequences is global warming and climate change. And so the check comes to you every month. You get your utilities bill and you'll see, oh, it's gone up $15 because the fossil fuel companies will pass that to the electric generator and the oil distribution companies, and finally to the grid distribution companies, and you'll see your bill go up. So what we did is we modeled how much the tax has to be to make sure that
sure that's
you're
covered.
not
Yes.
penalized by the tax bill. It's not a downstream bill that impacts the individual at the end. It's an upfront bill that impacts the big companies. That goes on then because corporations don't self-regulate. That's why we have the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Drinking Water Act, the EPA, stuff like this. And so the carbon fee and dividend, or the carbon tax and cashback, puts a price for the first time on CO2 as an equivalent gas, so CO2 plus methane plus other gases, that has never been done before, and that would balance out the subsidies that the oil and gas and coal companies have, which give them a benefit of up to 5 to 1, even now with the Inflation Reduction Act, a benefit of 5 to 1 in the free market compared to clean energies like wind and solar and battery storage. So that balances the playing field economically in the free market, and when it does so, all the renewables become cheaper than all of the fossil fuels. And by doing that, now me and you, we can all make a decision, oh, I want to buy the cheapest energy. A big complaint in Connecticut is we are some of the most expensive energy in the country. And then they say, so we can't do more solar.
We can't do more solar.
Well, it's not solar or wind's problem. Governor Lamont's total support of the offshore wind project is fantastic. And so that's the problem isn't renewables. The problem is how the corporations that charge us for energy, all the way from the initiation of taking coal or gas or oil out of the ground to where it comes to our house when we flip a switch, there's business practices there that are, in my mind, out of date. They are no longer Keynesian economic systems that we can use. The oil, gas, and coal companies and the energy generation companies and the energy distribution companies need to see all of us as partners, not customers. And as an example, on our house, we have solar panels and battery storage, and we're only using the grid 1% of the time. So when somebody in the Connecticut House or Senate says, this will overwhelm the grid,
it's not going to.
it won't. Our house is a living, breathing example of that. If we put solar panels on every rooftop and support Governor Lamont's wind enterprise, which is, there's 6 wind turbines that have been put out of New London in the last month. This is how we fix this. And a carbon tax or a carbon fee and dividend with a cashback to every citizen and legal resident, what that does is it levels the playing field. It means the renewable energies are cheaper, which means you'll pay less for them, and you'll have more disposable income in your household. This is a good thing.
One additional part of that bill is a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And what the heck is that, right? So that means that if companies that are exporting products are exporting to another country that has a carbon tax or some kind of carbon mechanism, you're not charged twice. So you respect another country's tax on carbon, if you will. And one important point along that line is that the EU has a carbon price. It has a price on carbon, and it, starting, I believe, this year in October, it will start using that in its exports as well. So American businesses that export to the EU will have to pay the EU a fee because on the carbon that they're exporting to them.
Union.
Exactly, sorry. But if we had our own carbon tax and keep that money here and help the transition to a clean energy, then that would not be charged. Does that make sense? So if we had our own mechanism of putting a price on carbon, it would just, again, accelerate that transition. We would not be paying other countries for
Okay.
uh,
All right.
pricing carbon.
Let's take a look at some of the slides that you brought
Sure.
at this point, okay? Studio, can we have the slides? Here we go. Do you want to explain this?
You want to take it in?
Well, natural gas. So again, the Yale Climate Communications Group did a very interesting little study where they asked people in Connecticut, oh, do you like natural gas? Yeah. Do you like methane? Oh, no. But so there's a disconnect in people's mind on what natural gas actually is. So that's why we want people to know that methane, which is a very, very powerful greenhouse gas, 25 to 80 times more effective as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, is the majority of what's in natural gas. The other thing I'll point out here is a lot of people use propane, and propane is, again, viewed as a cleaner gas, cleaner burning, slightly more energy per unit than natural gas. But when you think about what you need to do to get 1% out of natural gas, which is a combination of all of these gases, the amount of fracking that needs to be done, we didn't even talk about that, but that is a method of getting natural gas out of the ground, and it's not healthy for our planet either.
Yeah.
So again, using propane is not a solution, is
I got it. Okay.
the bottom line
Okay.
here.
Next slide.
So this is a program we use called En-ROADS, and the Climate Interactive Group with some universities created this over a number of years using dozens of experts and the International Panel on Climate Change information and a lot of other studies. And although this is a very busy slide, what you can see in the upper right is 3.6 degrees centigrade. That is 6.5 degrees Fahrenheit. If we stay on our current practices of energy, that's how much the planet is going to warm by 2100, which is only, what, 74 years away. And so what this program allows you to do on a global scale is you see the little black dots in the lower half. Those are sliders. And this program is free to use for anybody. And you can, for instance, the upper left little slider is coal, under that is oil, under that is natural gas, under that is bioenergy. You can slide those things down, that is less coal, oil, and natural gas, or up to the right. And then in the middle are renewables and nuclear and net zero carbon goals. And so you can move these things around and find what policies can you do in your city or in your state or in your country or globally through the Paris Agreement Accord and things like that to lower the temperature of the planet, save people's lives, money, and health. And this is a really important, powerful tool that allows us to look at ways, various things we might do will impact this. One of the things you see is a carbon tax has one of the greatest impacts of lowering the temperature of the
So
planet.
any lever that you change there, slider, you'll see a change in the temperature. Yeah. And I think
don't know if
there's
was there another slide
I
after
think
this?
the
of
next
same
slide
thing? Yeah.
should
So
be.
this is if you put a carbon tax into place. And
So
that,
it will reduce, obviously.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
so that's how this program works. And,
Yeah.
and we urge our politicians, and we have an expert in, I'm one of the people that worked with En-ROADS, and we have several other citizens climate lobby experts on this that have been sitting down with communities. We've been doing it for years now, and showing them this. And people are always astonished that, there's things we can do.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Next slide.
This is out of an explanation of the carbon fee and dividend bill that we were talking about. And it basically shows on the left the carbon economy. And if you input the carbon fee, shown there graphically as dollars,
Right.
that fee would be passed on through the generation and distribution to your home. But then out of the U.S. Treasury comes the carbon dividend. And that drives us towards a sustainable economy as renewable energies become cheaper and we use less of the fossil fuels. It's just a graphic
A
that
graphic
shows you
to
a path.
illustrate.
Okay.
This we made for one of our arguments in the Connecticut General Assembly. And so we have these targets that are changing, kind of a changing palette of targets that were going to be put into law in our bill that did not pass this last time. But what this shows is that if we want to really do something about CO2 emissions, as the governor has stated, as the governor has proposed emissions reduction targets, to get it down to 2050 levels, way down there in the green line, we're behind the 8 ball. And so in 2018, we missed our target. 2020, we missed our target. It was lower during the pandemic, but for obvious reasons, we weren't driving.
Right.
But we also missed it last year.
Yeah.
And in
a
fact,
new
right
report.
now, emissions in Connecticut are going up.
Up.
Really?
Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
graph shows that if without our climate bill and others like it, we're going to have greater impacts to our economy and to our health and to our lifestyles in Connecticut.
Right. Any other slide? Here's another slide.
This is a bill that is originated with Representative Christine Palm's description of how a bill gets passed in Connecticut.
Yeah.
It's an arduous, complicated
Right.
process.
You have to go through committee process.
Yes,
and the whole
exactly.
thing.
Right.
Here, public hearings. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so
a long.
people can look at that on pause when they're watching
right,
your show.
Right. Right. Yes.
This is out of my book, Navigating the Energy Maze. One of the arguments we're having in the state and in the country is about microgrids. A microgrid is a isolated or connected but small, unique and self-operating energy generation system using solar panels and wind. You can use natural gas and oil if you want, but that's not helping the situation. So like in an industrial park or a university, most universities have a generator, which is either natural gas or oil. And why not use solar for that and battery storage? That would be a microgrid. And so that saves them money in the long term if they do it right. Compared to the traditional grid, which would be our grid that we have in Connecticut now that we get our power from, which tries to connect everything and is extremely expensive and very expensive to maintain, repair, and upgrade.
Right.
So that's what that shows.
Okay. I think. Oh, what's this?
Oh.
This
yeah.
is a big debate about EVs. Oh, they're not
Yes.
cost effective. They don't really work. There was
They're
even,
too heavy.
even one of the representatives in the House said that nobody wants them. We have an EV, we want one. But they're actually, it's like any car market. Remember when Obama bailed out the auto industry? Well, they had a tough time then. So, it fluctuates. But I made this because I was teaching a class over at University of Pennsylvania. And you can see the Tesla and the Chevy Bolt electric cars at the top. They get an equivalent, 120 to 130 miles per gallon equivalent, compared to the hybrid like a Toyota Prius, and then other vehicles. Now, the hottest selling car
Ford.
is the pickup truck.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it said the Ford. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this thing only gets 50 miles to the gallon, according to the EPA. It weighs
Twice.
almost twice as much as an EV, and it uses, because of its weight, 45% more natural materials to make it. So the argument about this, we're using lithium in car batteries, we've always been using lithium. And there's one guy in the House here that said, we can't use lithium because children miners in the Congo are making it. Well, actually, they don't mine lithium in the Congo. They mine cobalt and copper and things like that. I worked in the Congo, and these are not healthy mines for anybody. When I worked there in the 90s, there were not children miners. They were men, and they were all working in horrible conditions. The thing is, we shouldn't use child miners is true. It's a human rights violation and a horrific thing. But to pick on lithium when we have 35 metals that we need to drive civilization is disingenuous and hypocritical. So that argument, I don't buy it.
Yeah.
So that's why I made that.
But
chart.
electric vehicles are well used in Connecticut.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what percentage of drivers?
Oh, it's only
It's low.
It's
still
only
very
a
low.
percent.
I did
or-
read it
yeah.
recently. It was quite low.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
know, one of the things that Tesla did is they sponsored and for a long time allowed a business or a town to put in free chargers,
Yeah.
and this was really smart. It was like if Henry Ford financed gas stations,
Right.
and so we have driven our Tesla across country and back and to the Midwest several times and never had a single problem
Really?
charging the car.
Never.
People
Yeah.
say, oh, I can't go very far. Well, yeah, we get 320 miles on a charge, and it tells you where to stop
Tells
and
you where the
charge.
next
Yeah.
charge is.
And so
In the
it's,
navigation.
it's easy.
Yeah. It's
It's
very
easy.
easy.
Are there problems with EVs? Sure. Are there problems with gas cars? Sure. Do we stop driving gas cars?
Well, what
'cause
are
there
the problems? Let's just let people know. What are the problems with
Well, one
EVs?
of them is people complain about range. So a long-range gas car might get 600 miles. Well, there's a battery that is coming out in the next year or so that will do that for an EV. So that's not an
Yeah,
issue
range
anymore.
anxiety is a big one.
Yep. Another one is
But
charging
a home charger. So a lot of people I don't think realize that it's pretty affordable, and there are
Like you
incentives to
can charge
help.
at home.
Yeah,
times. And
so
we use their solar panels.
our
free.
Tesla charger was, I think, $500 to buy, and again, there were rebates available for those, and then of course the electrician is the most important or most
Expensive.
expensive part of the deal, and again that also had incentives. Certainly at the federal level, because
So the Tesla's expensive to buy, right?
Well,
What-
on that chart, you're going to see that the base price of 35,000, you can add another 10 grand or
the
20
base
grand.
price
for
is
something.
only 35,000.
yeah, so you can
It's-
keep adding and
that's-
getting things.
And
yeah.
Ford and Chevy and BMW and,
Yeah.
and all these other car companies are coming out with other versions. And Tesla said they're coming out with an EV that's going to cost $28,000. So
Yeah.
when you have a new industry,
Okay,
things are
right.
always expensive. So the price differential, I've had people in my classes and my workshops drive up in an Escalade and say, I can't afford an EV. And I said, your Escalade cost $120,000. Well, yeah, but it doesn't get 600 miles. And I said, well, do you ever stop for lunch, or do you have to drive 600 miles each time? Well, then, we can't charge because it'll take an hour, which is what somebody on the house
Oh,
said.
yes, that's right.
It's going to take an hour or more to charge. 20 minutes in a supercharger. And the superchargers that are coming out with a new battery, 10 minutes
10
to 5
minutes.
minutes.
We read
So the
new
industry
technologies,
evolves
yeah.
as
So it's going to take time. What's your prediction
Yes.
for how much time it's going to take for people to really acclimate
5
themselves
years.
to it?
5 years. As where people are seeing, even in the House, after that one representative said nobody wants them and they take too long to charge, the next representative, which was a Republican, by the way, said, "Oh, I'm thinking of buying one."
Yeah,
So even in that caucus, there's disagreement.
and they're fun to drive. I mean, they're very fun to
They're
drive.
quiet and they don't stink.
And they,
Okay.
we have a neighbor.
Now, I want to talk, before we
Sure.
end, I want to talk about, Roger, why don't you hold up your
Oh.
book? I didn't know if we had a slide about that, but there's
Yeah.
your book,
Oh, there it is.
Navigating, there it is.
Navigating the Energy Maze,
Yes.
Yeah.
the
Tell us
transition to a sustainable future. I wrote this with colleague George Shaw. And
What's in a couple of sentences, what's the thesis of the book?
how do we make the transformation from a carbon economy to clean energy economy in a practical way, looking at our natural resources, our energy supply, how we build our grids, and the legislation we pass. That's the fundamentals. And the thing that we found in this research is it's not all that hard. It takes empowerment of our politicians and the will of our corporations that work in the process. You look at a big oil company, I've got friends that work for those companies. They're good people, and it's a necessary thing right now. And if they transform their energy, their businesses with this in mind, their companies will continue to thrive.
Yeah.
And that's what we want. We don't want to put them out of business.
Right.
We want them to grow
Grow
with
and
us.
Yeah,
change.
you know what I find interesting, that is it true that America is the greatest exporter and producer of oil in the world now? But we don't like to admit it.
We're not. It fluctuates depending on sometimes daily.
Okay.
But we're up in the
We're
top
up there,
5,
yeah.
and sometimes in the top 1 or 2. And that's because we have subsidized oil prices in this country, unlike Europe. And we also have poor regulations on how and where we place and drill for oil. So if there's a rule, if you have a field and you permit all of your oil wells or gas wells together, you've got some serious permits and regulations. But if you do one well at a time, a lot of those permits are easier to get, or some of the extreme ones fall away. I'm an economic geologist. I've seen this. And so what the oil companies do is they say, well, we'll just permit each individual oil well, and we'll put 1,000 of them in, and we'll be able to do this really quickly.
Okay.
So.
All right, to conclude our discussion today, I learned so much. Why don't you tell us, what can a person watching do, the average citizen? What can they do in the way of education or lobbying or teaching others?
I think the biggest thing would be to really learn more about it, how you personally can transition beyond what we talked about today. So going to an electric car, electrifying your house, but more importantly right now, I think we need to talk to our legislators more and get people to vote. Environmentalists are typically not good voters, which shocked me. It was one of the biggest reasons I joined the League of Women Voters. I think it's our civic responsibility to vote, and so we need to vote and get people that represent the majority of the people in the state.
Okay, and Roger, your final thoughts.
Totally agree with that. Voting and getting the people that truly represent you, not the people that you think represent you, but they don't. That's huge. This electrification in Connecticut is something that individuals can do. So here's an example. We put in our solar panels, and our neighbor, who's an engineer, worked at Electric Boat, looked over and he says, those things don't really work, do they? Well, yeah, they do. I showed him our power bill, and he goes, wow. So he got them. Boom, they went up. Then we drove in with an electric vehicle one day, and he said, well, those things, that's not worth it, is it? And I let him drive it around for an hour, and the next day he bought one.
Yeah.
And he bought one used on eBay. He bought a used Tesla for a bargain of a price.
A fancier model than we have.
So living
Well,
by
the power
example.
of example.
Yes,
The power of
exactly.
example.
So,
and so don't
yeah.
be afraid. If you electrify your house, that means getting rid of an oil furnace and using heat pumps. These things are expensive, but so is a big new furnace. So is all of that kind of stuff. So if you're building a new house, do it with all electricity systems. No natural gas, no oil furnace. If you do that at the start, you're going to save boatloads of money down the line. If you have a house or a business, put solar panels on the roof. Don't rent them, by the way. We're finding problems with the rentals that can cost you too much money in the long run.
Yeah.
So, but when you buy $20,000 of solar panels, you're going to end up paying about $6,500. This is our personal experience.
After incentives.
Through the Green Bank and the federal tax credits and stuff like that. So you get that initial investment back very quickly, and then you have about a 5-year period where your return on investment pays off the rest of it, and then you have free energy. And that's a good thing.
Okay.
So that's what I would do.
Well, thank you so much, Ann and Roger. I learned a lot. I hope people watching will learn a lot too, and will take some action to be an example for others, hopefully, and to lobby our leaders, and as you say, vote in November for the candidates who support environmental change, and know who they are, and make them tell you about that issue in a debate or a questionnaire and so forth. Okay, thanks so much, everyone. It's great to have Roger and Ann with us. We'll see you next time on Talk Back. Bye.
Thank you, Sheila.
Yeah.
So much.
Yeah, thanks.